Good morning, guys. So today we're going to be talking about our book, A Long Walk to Water. So what I want you to do is I want you to go grab your book, A Long Walk to Water. So go make sure that you have this. Pause your video and make sure that you've got this before we start. All right. Now that you have your book, we're going to read chapter 1 together today. So last week, we read the first half of chapter 1, which was about a little girl named Naya. So today, we're going to be reading about another character. But before we get started, there are a few things I want to talk to you about that are really, really important. Okay? So, the characters in this book are living through a war. So, there are going to be several times where we have to read about violent things and even death. I want to go ahead and tell you about this so that you will know that some parts of this book are going to be really hard to read. As we read, I want you to remember that we live in a broken and sinful world, and because of sin in the world, sometimes people do mean things. Sometimes they do bad things, and sometimes bad things happen to us and to other people. That doesn't mean that God doesn't love us or care about us or the people that bad things are happening to. It just means that sometimes bad things have to happen in order for good things to happen. And I know that sometimes that's very hard to understand. But it's really important to keep that in mind as we read this book. Sometimes bad things happen, and there's nothing we can do to stop them or change them or make them better. And there are going to be bad things that happen in this book because it's a book about a war. And you guys know that war is violent and not nice, and that it happens every day. Alright? So, I want you to just know that this book is going to be hard. I also want you to know that if we read anything that you think is scary, or that confuses you, or that you have questions about, or even if it just makes you sad, I want you to talk to me about it. That's why I'm here. When I was reading this book before school got started this school year, it made me feel sad, and I had to talk to someone about it. So if it makes you feel sad, you can talk to me, you can talk to your parents. I'm going to ask Mr. Lalo to send them a message telling them about the book we're going to be reading. But I just want you to know that if something upsets you or makes you feel sad, it's okay. It's all right to be sad, and it's all right to tell me about it so that we can talk about it. It's also okay if it doesn't make you sad, because for some of you, you'll say, this is just a book. It doesn't make me sad. Because sometimes I can read sad books and not feel sad because I know that they're just a book. This one made me sad because I know that this is a real thing that happens to people. The two characters in this story are made up. They're not real. But they're based on people who are real. So they're inspired by real people. There's another thing I want you to remember is that if this doesn't make you feel sad, we need to remember that we have to take this seriously. We can't make jokes about it, even though sometimes that helps us feel better about things that are upsetting. We can't make jokes about it, and we can't make fun of it. It's not something that's funny. There are going to be a lot of things that me and you have to talk about this year in 7th grade that are hard, and that are hard to understand, and that are sad. There are going to be things that we talk about in history class that will make us feel sad. There are things in this book that will make us feel sad. But we need to remember that we can learn from them and learn important things about the world and about ourselves. So it's not okay to make jokes about it, because while these two characters aren't real people, they are supposed to be like real people. There are people who went through this same kind of thing. All right? We don't ever want to make a joke about someone else's pain or about someone else's suffering. So those are some things I want you to remember as we read. And if you have any questions, tell me, okay? I'm happy to talk to you about it, because I know it's kind of difficult and it's confusing sometimes, and some of you will have questions about it. So it's okay to ask. All right? So get out your book, and we're going to start reading chapter 1 together. So just to remind you, we've already read this top part. This part is about a little girl named Naya. She's 12 years old. Or is she 11? I think I lied. She's 11. I'm so sorry. I always want to say that Naya is 12. So Naya is 11. She's a little girl, and she's walking to get water from the river. So if you'll remember our assignment from last week, where I told you to tell me things you knew about Naya, those are some things we know about Naya. We also know that she's tall for her age. All right, so we're gonna start reading. So we're on page 1, on the bottom part where the text gets darker, and it says Southern Sudan, 1985. Okay, so that's where we're gonna start reading at. Southern Sudan, 1985. Salva sat cross-legged on the bench. He kept his head turned toward the front, hands folded, back perfectly straight. Everything about him was paying attention to the teacher. Everything except his eyes and his mind. Turn the page. His eyes kept flicking toward the window through which he could see the road home. Just a little while longer, a few minutes more, and he would be walking on that road. The teacher droned on with the lesson about the Arabic language. Salva spoke the language of his Dinka tribe at home. But in school, he learned Arabic, the official language of the Sudanese government far away to the north. 11 years old on his last birthday, Salva was a good student. He already knew the lesson, which was why he was letting his mind wander down the road ahead of his body. Salva was well aware of how lucky he was to be able to go to school. He could not attend the entire year because during the dry season, his family moved away from their village. During the rainy season, he could walk to school, which was only an hour and a half. Which was only a half hour from his home. Salva's father was a successful man. He owned many head of cattle and worked as their village's judge, an honored, respected position. Salva had 3 brothers and 2 sisters. As each boy reached the age of about 10 years, he was sent off to school. Salva's older brothers, Eric and Ring, had gone to school before him. Last year, it had been Salva's turn. His 2 sisters, Akit and Agneth, did not go to school. Like the other girls in the village, they stayed home and learned from their mother how to keep house. Most of the time, Salva was glad to be able to go to school. But some days, he wished he was still back at home herding cattle. He and his brothers, along with the sons of his father's other wives, would walk with the herds to the water holes, where there was good grazing. Their responsibilities depended on how old they were. Salva's younger brother, Kul, was taking care of just 1 cow. Like his brothers before him, he would be in charge of more cows every year. Before Salva had begun going to school, He had helped look after the entire herd, and his younger brother as well. The boys had to keep an eye on the cows, but the cows did not really need much care. That left plenty of time to play. Salva and the other boys made cows out of clay. The more cows you made, the richer you were. But they had to be fine and healthy animals. It took time to make a lump of clay look like a good cow. The boys would challenge each other to see who could make the most and the best looking cows. Other times, they would practice with their bows and arrows, shooting at small animals or birds. They weren't very good at this yet, but once in a while they got lucky. Those were the best days. When one of them managed to kill a ground squirrel or a rabbit, or a guinea hen or a grouse. The boys' aimless play halted and there was suddenly a lot of work to do. Some of them gathered wood to build a fire. Others helped clean and dress the animal. Then they roasted it on the fire. None of this took place quietly. Salva had his own opinion of how the fire should be built and how long the meat needed to cook, and so did each of the others. The fire needs to be bigger. It won't last long enough. We need more wood. No, it's big enough already. Quick, turn it over before it's ruined. The juices dripped and sizzled. A delicious smell filled the air. Finally, they couldn't wait 1 second longer. There was only enough for each boy to have a few bites, but oh, how delicious those bites were. Salva swallowed and turned his eyes back toward the teacher. He wished he hadn't recalled those times, because the memories made him hungry. Milk. When he got home, he would have a bowl of fresh milk, which would keep his belly full until supper time. He knew just how it would be. His mother would rise from her work, grinding meal, and walk around to the side of the house that faced the road. She would shade her eyes with one hand, searching for him. From far off, he would see her bright orange headscarf, and he would raise his arm in greeting. By the time he reached the house, she would have gone inside to get his bowl of milk ready for him. Clack! The noise had come from outside. Was it a gunshot or just a car backfiring? The teacher stopped talking for a moment. Every head in the room turned toward the window. Nothing. Silence. The teacher cleared his throat, which drew the boys' attention to the front of the room again. He continued the lesson from where he had left off. Then, crack, pop, pop, crack. Ack, 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 ack. Gunfire. Everyone down, the teacher shouted. Some of the boys moved at once, ducking their heads and hunching over. Others sat frozen, their eyes and mouths wide open. Salva covered his head with his hands and looked from side to side in panic. The teacher edged his way along the wall to the window. He took a quick peek outside. The gunfire had stopped, but now people were shouting and running. Go quickly, all of you, the teacher said, his voice low and urgent. Into the bush, do you hear me? Not home. Don't run home. They'll be going into the villages. Stay away from the villages. Run into the bush. He went to the door and looked out again. Go, now, all of you. The war had started just 2 years earlier. Salva did not understand much about it, but he knew that the rebels from the southern part of Sudan, where he and his family lived, were fighting against the government, which was based in the north. Most of the people who lived in the north were Muslim, and the government wanted all of Sudan to become a Muslim country, a place where the beliefs of Islam are followed. But the people in the south were of different religions and did not want to be forced to practice Islam. They began fighting for independence from the north. The fighting was scattered all around southern Sudan, and now the war had come to where Salva lived. The boys scrambled to their feet. Some of them were crying. The teacher began hurrying students out the door. Salva was near the end of the line. He felt his heart beating so hard that his pulse pounded in his throat and ears. He wanted to shout, I need to go home. I must go home. But the words were blocked by the wild thumping in his throat. When he got to the door, he looked out. Everyone was running. Men, children, women carrying babies. The air was full of dust that had been kicked up by all of those running feet. Some of the men were shouting and waving guns. Salva saw all of this with one glance. Then he was running too, running as hard as he ever could, away into the bush, away from home. All right, so tomorrow we're gonna have a few questions and we're gonna talk about this a little bit more. If there was anything you didn't understand or that you have questions about, send me a message so that I can explain it. I don't want to explain everything in one video or they'll get too long and be too confusing. So if a bunch of you ask me the same question, I'll explain it either on our Google Classroom or I'll make a video to explain it. All right? So for today, I want you to think about this and think about what happened so that tomorrow you can write me a summary and tell me what happened in this chapter, because there was a lot that happened. All right? I'll talk to you guys tomorrow.